The smell of the alley was a constant. Not just garbage, but that heavy, metallic sweet stink of decay and something else. Something synthetic. I knew it better than I knew my own mother's perfume. I was 17 and my world was 48 square feet of peeling paint and the endless vibrating noise of the city outside. We lived on the third floor of a crumbling brick building, tucked deep into the sort of neighborhood people drove through quickly, windows up. I just failed my second attempt at the driver's permit test. It wasn't the parallel parking that got me, it was the pressure. The deep, heavy knowledge that getting that license wasn't about freedom for me. It was about work. It was about being the one who could drive mom to her 2 cleaning jobs, who could pick up the extra shifts, who could finally ease the impossible weight on her shoulders. That evening, I was walking back from the testing center. My head felt like it was stuffed with cotton, a numb, cold failure. I cut through the back streets, the ones lined with industrial dumpsters. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't a mountain of trash, not exactly. It was a spill. A careless, overflowing mess from a dumpster behind the old print shop. And among the sodden cardboard and broken pallets, there was a flash. A brilliant, almost impossible glint of turquoise. I stopped. My worn sneakers scuffed the concrete. I hesitated. Felt stupid. Like something from a cartoon. Digging in trash. But the failure was still a bitter taste and my mind, I think, was just looking for a distraction. A small, pointless task to reset the circuit. I reached in. The turquoise wasn't a jewel, of course. It was a smooth, heavy piece of plexiglass, maybe a discarded window sample, cut with a strange, jagged edge. But then as I pulled it out, it caught the street light. And it shone. It wasn't trash. It was a material. Then I started seeing it all. Not just the blue piece, but everything. The way the copper wire, stripped out of an old appliance, coiled like a tiny metallic snake. The smooth, almost creamy white of a stack of discarded PVC piping, cut into perfect inch-long sections. The sheer volume of aluminum pull tabs, thousands of them, bright silver like tiny worthless coins. It hit me then. Not like a business idea. Not yet. It hit me like a revelation about my neighborhood. People weren't just throwing away garbage. They were throwing away resources. They were throwing away potential. We were surrounded by it. A silent, buried fortune of raw material that everyone else saw as a problem, a smell, a blight. I didn't have money. I had zero savings. The bank account was a joke, a constant, brutal $4.32. But I had time, and I had a desperate need for a solution that didn't involve waiting tables or stocking shelves for minimum wage. I needed an edge. I gathered what I could carry. The plexiglass, the copper wire, a few dozen of those aluminum tabs. I stuffed them into my threadbare backpack. The bag felt strangely light, but the weight in my stomach, that familiar heavy dread, it had lifted just a little. A fraction. Back home, Mom was already asleep, the TV murmuring in the corner. I went to the tiny, cramped kitchen counter. I laid the pieces out. They looked dirty, pitiful, but under the harsh fluorescent light, they still held that glimmer. I thought about the pieces. The smooth, sharp edge of the plexiglass. The way the copper bent but didn't break. I remembered a vague lesson from middle school shop class, something about tensile strength. My hands started itching to do something. To transform it. The next few days blurred. I started small. I used an old pair of pliers from my dad's broken toolbox, the one he'd left behind, to bend the copper into tight, delicate loops. I took a piece of the plexiglass, carefully cleaned it, and roughed up the edges with sandpaper until it looked less like trash and more like beach glass. Then came the first creation. I drilled a tiny hole in the corner of the plexiglass using a mini drill bit I managed to buy for $9.37, a terrifying chunk of my $4.32 plus a few odd job dollars. I threaded the copper wire through, twisted it into a makeshift bail, and hung it from a piece of thin black cord. It was a necklace. Ugly maybe to an outsider. But to me, it was a transmutation. Junk turned into something. I called it the Alley Glint. Cheesy, I know, but it was honest. I showed it to Mom. She was tired. Bone weary. She looked at it, her eyes slow to focus. She didn't smile, but she did that thing she always did. She touched my cheek with the back of her hand. "It's pretty, son," she whispered, her voice rough. "Where did you buy the materials?" "I didn't buy them, Mom. I found them." I didn't elaborate. I couldn't. The full scope of it, the idea that our escape, our one shot at a decent life, might depend on me becoming a glorified dumpster diver, that was too much to say out loud. The next step was selling. I'd seen a few things online. People selling handmade stuff. It sounded distant, unattainable, like a country club for crafts. but it was free to set up a shop. Almost free. 50 cents a listing. I scraped together the cash for 3 listings. 3 items. The Alley Glint necklace, a small sculpture made of twisted copper and aluminum tabs. I called it Urban Bloom. And a small geometric coaster set I'd cut from the PVC pipe. I didn't have a camera. I had my cracked screen phone. I spent an hour trying to find the best light, finally settling on the windowsill during the brief, perfect slant of the late afternoon sun. I took the photos. They were grainy, but they captured the light of the pieces. That was the most important thing. My description? It wasn't just necklace. I wrote about the reclaimed rarity. I wrote about the silent history of forgotten materials and the second chance I was giving them. I wrote about the sustainability, the zero waste aspect. I was trying to sell a story more than a product. A philosophy. I listed them. And then I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Every 5 minutes I'd check my phone. Nothing. An hour. Nothing. All the effort, the risk of those precious dollar bills, the embarrassment of sifting through garbage. Maybe it was all just garbage. Maybe I was fooling myself. I went to bed that night feeling the familiar, cold pressure on my chest. This time it wasn't just the neighborhood. It was the possibility of a hope, however small, being crushed. Then, at 3:17 a.m., a tiny ping broke the silence. My phone screen flickered to life. A notification. Etsy, items sold. I bolted upright. My heart was hammering a chaotic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. It was the Alley Glint necklace. Sold. For $25. Plus shipping. $25. From literal trash. The weight was gone. Replaced by a strange, tingling lightness. This wasn't a job. This was an alchemy. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep into my bones, that my life had just irrevocably changed. I had found my edge. Now came the long, grinding climb. That first sale, that $25, it didn't just pay for the $9 drill bit. It paid for the idea that I wasn't trapped. That was worth a fortune. But the real work, the actual grind, started the very next morning. The small victory was a flash of lightning. The struggle was the long, dark, confusing path it illuminated. The first struggle? Supply. The print shop alley was a bust. I'd picked it clean. I realized quickly that my idea couldn't rely on random, lucky finds. I needed a consistent source of quality discarded materials. Not just trash. Materials. I started riding my old rusted bicycle, the one with the perpetually squeaky chain, further and further out. My routine became a secret second life. School, then an hour of homework, and then the hunt. The hunt was the hard part, the humbling part. I'd circle industrial parks, construction sites, and the backs of small manufacturing warehouses. I remember one freezing afternoon a little past 5. The sun was setting, bleeding orange and purple over the gray warehouses. I was behind a small electronics repair shop. They had a huge open-top bin. And inside it I saw a tangle of circuit boards. Beautiful, bright green and gold mosaics of tech waste. They looked like abstract art. My mind raced. Earrings, pendants, maybe even coasters sealed in resin. This wasn't trash. This was texture. But as I reached for them, a massive, gruff man, the owner I guessed, stepped out, wiping grease on a rag. His eyes narrowed. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" His voice was a low, rumbling challenge. I froze. My cheeks felt hot. The sheer, suffocating embarrassment of being caught scavenging hit me like a physical blow. "And nothing, sir," I stammered, pulling my hand back, my fingers still tingling from the cold. "Just looking." "Looking? That's my garbage kid. Go on. Get out of here." He stood there, arms crossed, waiting. I pedaled away, the shame making my legs pump uselessly fast. It was more than shame. It was a realization. To them, I was a thief. I was encroaching on their waste stream, their right to discard. I was disrupting the fundamental order of the neighborhood, which was, poor kids don't touch what rich people, or even marginally successful people, throw away. I couldn't rely on stealth and luck. I needed a system. I took a deep breath. I turned the bike around. I went back. My heart was a chaotic drum solo, but the alternative was going back to that $4.32 in the bank. I cycled right up to him. He looked surprised, maybe even annoyed. "Sir," I started, trying to keep my voice even, "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to steal. I'm a student. I started a small business, making jewelry and decor out of recycled materials." I gestured vaguely towards my backpack. "I saw your circuit boards. They're perfect. They're art." He just stared. His expression was flat. "Look," I continued, pressing on. You pay a company to haul that away, right? If I take them, you save on volume. It's less in your bin. I'll pay you for them. Not much. $5 a haul? 10? Silence. He scratched his chin. His initial anger seemed to have been replaced by confusion. He was processing the absurdity of a kid offering to pay him for his own garbage. $5 a haul, he finally grunted. You come by after 6 on Tuesdays and Fridays. Don't make a mess. And don't touch the real scrap metal that I sell. Deal? I said, a massive, relieved breath escaping me. It was a pivot. A small, crucial shift from scavenger to supplier partner. That $10 weekly payment was a painful hit to my meager funds, but it bought me two things: legal access and consistency. The next 3 months were a blur of creation, refinement, and cold, hard numbers. I started tracking everything. Cost of goods sold, COGS $10 a week for circuit boards, plus $1 or $2 for cleaning supplies, fine grit sandpaper, and occasional tiny jewelry findings, clasps, jump rings, that I couldn't salvage. Time, 4 hours of sourcing/cleaning per week. 10 to 15 hours of design and crafting. 2 hours for photography, listing, and packaging. Revenue, I was averaging about 3 sales a week. My prices ranged from $20 for a small pair of aluminum tab earrings to $45 for a large, complex plexiglass and copper pendant. Total weekly revenue, maybe $75. $75 a week. After the initial COGS and shipping costs, I was netting maybe $55. $55. It was more than zero, a vast improvement, but it wasn't a fortune. It was still barely scratching the surface of my goal: financial breathing room for mom. I started to hit the marketing wall. Etsy was crowded. My items were well made, I thought, and the story was compelling, but I was just one tiny whisper in a hurricane of products. My beautiful, ethically sourced, handcrafted coasters were getting lost. I had to rethink the whole thing. The product wasn't just the jewelry. The product was the story. I started using Instagram, which was free, and I approached it like a documentary. I didn't just post pictures of the finished product. I posted photos of the process. A shot of my hands, dirty and gloved, pulling the glowing green circuit boards out of the bin. Caption: where most see a dump, I see a harvest. Tuesday's score. A close-up of a shattered piece of glass, with a circle drawn on it in marker. Caption: trash to treasure, the blueprint for tomorrow's ring. A picture of my tiny workspace, tools scattered, lit by a single desk lamp. Caption: the factory is open. Turning broken things into a better future, one wire at a time. This was the key. People didn't just want a cool necklace. They wanted to feel like they were part of a movement. They wanted to buy something that was both beautiful and moral. The sales didn't explode overnight, but they started to trend upward. Slowly, steadily. 1 week, 5 sales. The next 6. My net weekly income crept up to $90. Then $120. But the struggle wasn't just external. It was internal. The pressure of time. Trying to maintain a B average in school while spending every free hour elbow deep in refuse and hot glue. I was exhausted. I was running on caffeine and the sheer terror of failure. My friend, Leo, who worked at a local convenience store, noticed. He stopped by my house one Saturday morning. "Dude, you look like a zombie," he said, leaning against the peeling door frame. "What are you doing? You used to play ball on Saturdays." "I'm working, Leo," I replied, wiping metallic dust off my hands. "I'm behind on a custom order, a huge one. A woman wants 8 PVC pipe candle holders for a sustainable event." Leo looked around my small, cluttered room. He saw the piles of cleaned but uncut materials, the small soldering iron, the half-finished pieces. "Look, man," he said, serious now, "you're doing good. I see your posts. But you can't keep doing this alone. You're drowning in raw material and you can't scale this up. You need a better system. And you need to sleep." He was right. The custom order, for example. 8 candle holders. It was a massive $200 order, a breakthrough. But it would take me 3 solid days to complete, and I had a history paper due. I was the bottleneck. My hands, my time were the limiting factor. I was facing the classic entrepreneur's trap. I was a successful artisan but a failing businessman. I had proven the concept, but the structure was fragile, built entirely on my single, overworked back. The $120 a week was great, but it wasn't a sustainable path to billions, or even breathing room. I realized I couldn't just create the product. I had to create a process. I had to learn to leverage. I had to somehow hire my first employee. And that, in my neighborhood with my budget, felt like climbing Mount Everest. Hiring felt ridiculous. I mean, who was I? A kid running a business out of his bedroom, paying a meager $10 a week for his primary raw material. I couldn't offer health insurance, paid time off, or even a guaranteed minimum wage. I could barely guarantee I'd make my own bus fare some weeks. But Leo's words had stuck. You're the bottleneck. And the exhaustion was real. I had a small stockpile of perfect, clean, geometric acrylic pieces from an old sign shop, pure gold, but I simply didn't have the hours to sand, polish, and drill them all. I was paralyzed by my own success. I decided to try a different approach. Not a hire. A partnership of need. I thought about my neighborhood. Who had time? Who had skills? And, most importantly, who needed a little bit of my tiny, shaky income stream? I walked over to the community center. It was a dusty place, mostly used by the Senior Bridge Club and a few after-school programs. That's where I found Mrs. Rodriguez. Mrs. Rodriguez was in her late 60s. She was a quiet, meticulous woman who had lived on our block forever. She was a phenomenal knitter and crocheter. I'd seen her intricate blankets. She had a need for small supplemental income, and she had an extraordinary attention to detail. I approached her one afternoon while she was patiently teaching a group of 10-year-olds how to do a pearl stitch. Mrs. Rodriguez, I started nervously. I have a project. I'm making jewelry and decor, from recycled materials. I need someone with very steady hands and patience for the finishing work. I showed her my materials. The tiny fiddly clasps. The microscopic drill bits needed for the aluminum tabs. The painstaking process of polishing the rough-cut PVC pipe edges so they were perfectly smooth. She didn't laugh. She didn't look down on the materials. She picked up a sliver of circuit board, tracing the delicate copper lines with a wrinkled finger. Her eyes were sharp. "This is good work, Matthias," she said, using my full name. "What are you paying?" I swallowed. The truth. The cold, hard reality of my budget. "I can't pay hourly right now," I admitted. "I can only pay piecework. A commission. You polish and drill 20 pieces of acrylic for me, I pay you $15. You assemble 50 pairs of these aluminum tab earrings, I pay you $30. It was low. Painfully low. I knew it. But it was flexible. She could do it in her kitchen at her own pace while watching her telenovelas. She calculated quickly in her head. She was a woman who knew the value of $1. The aluminum tabs are easy but time-consuming. The acrylic is harder. I will do it. But I need to be paid in cash, same day. Deal? I breathed out, extending my hand. Mrs. Rodriguez became my finishing department. And that was the second pivot. I stopped being just a creator and started becoming an operations manager. My job shifted. It wasn't about making the product anymore. It was about sourcing, design, marketing, and sales. My time was now leveraged. The effects were immediate and profound. My weekly output, the number of finished, ready-to-list items, tripled. That week, I generated $380 in revenue. I paid Mrs. Rodriguez $75 for her work. A steep cut, yes, but a life-changing leveraging of my time. My net profit jumped from $120 to over $200 that week. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a profound sense of momentum. This was it. This was the system. But success, as it always does, brought a new set of problems. The first was storage and logistics. My tiny bedroom was now unmanageable. It was piles of cleaned PVC, bins of aluminum tabs, trays of finished circuit board earrings, and stacks of shipping boxes. The smell, even of clean, synthetic materials, was getting to Mom. "Matthias," she said one evening, gently, as she tried to navigate around a box of pull tabs to get to the laundry basket. "We can't live like this. The house is a workshop. We need the space." She was right. I was slowly transforming our shared, tiny living space into a chaotic, makeshift factory. I needed a dedicated space. I found one in the basement of the apartment building. It was a small, dusty storage cage, maybe 6 by 6 feet, that the landlord had used for broken maintenance equipment. It had a bare bulb overhead and smelled faintly of mildew, but it was mine. He charged me $50 a month for the rental, an agonizing, recurring fixed cost that felt like a knife twist to my budget. But it was necessary. It was the cost of professionalization. The second problem was scale and reputation. My Instagram marketing was working too well. Orders were coming in from outside my local bubble, from all over the country. People loved the story. But now, my simple sourcing from the electronics repair shop and the occasional lucky find wasn't enough. I needed thousands of aluminum tabs, not hundreds. I needed hundreds of square feet of plexiglass, not small shards. I had to put on my business hat, which felt too big and heavy for my 17-year-old head, and go corporate sourcing. I drew up a simple one-page proposal. Eco-partnership for zero-waste material reclaim. It had my story, my mission, and my growth numbers. I highlighted the tax benefits of responsible material disposal and the positive press they could get from partnering with a local youth entrepreneur. I went to the biggest aluminum can recycling center in the city. I asked to speak to the manager. I was dressed in my least ragged hoodie and my cleanest jeans. The manager, a man named Mr. Silva, was intimidating. He sat behind a scratched metal desk, surrounded by the constant, deafening roar of crushing machinery. "You want my pull tabs?" he asked, incredulous. "Kid, we sell that metal by the ton. It goes to a smelter." "Yes, sir," I shouted over the noise. "But you're losing a valuable product, the story. Your pull tabs are just a commodity. Mine are a narrative. I'm turning your waste into high-end, sustainable jewelry. We can put your logo on the packaging. You can say you're powering youth entrepreneurship." I had researched the exact market price for bulk aluminum scrap. I knew I couldn't compete with the smelter's price. I had to sell the intangible. I offered him a deal. I would come by once a week and collect by hand all the pull tabs they segregated. I would pay him a flat $10 per 100-pound bag. This was a fraction of the smelter price, but he didn't have to clean them, process them, or load them onto a truck. It was pure, no-labor income for him. And I would shout his company's name on every social media post. He looked at the small, earnest kid in front of him, covered in metallic dust. He probably thought I was insane. But the marketing value proposition, that one was harder to dismiss. $10 a bag, he finally conceded, leaning back. "No complaints. You make your own schedule. But you touch nothing else." I felt a dizzying mix of elation and terror. I now had consistent, massive volume for my primary material. I had moved from dumpster diving to being a legitimate commercial buyer of industrial waste. The system was in place. I had a supplier, Mr. Silva, a processor, Mrs. Rodriguez, a workspace, the mildewy storage cage, and a sales channel, Etsy/Instagram. The weekly revenue was now consistently hitting $500. I took the cash home that week, crumpled and smelling faintly of metal, and handed Mom $300. "Here, Mom," I said, my voice thick. "This is rent. This is food. This is a start." She stared at the money. Her eyes were bright, and for the first time in a very long time, they weren't tired. She didn't ask where it came from. She just held it to her chest. "Matthias," she whispered, "my son, you did this." The external struggle, the one against scarcity and lack of resource, was being won. But I knew the final struggle had to be fought, the one for permanence and growth. I needed to turn a fragile, handmade operation into a scalable, lasting business model. The grind had to begin. The grind was the hardest phase because it wasn't romantic. It was pure, repetitive, soul-numbing systems building. The excitement of the first sale, the thrill of the pivot, that was gone. This was about making the $500 a week stick and then turning it into 1,000. My life was now dictated by a spreadsheet. Not a fancy piece of software, but a cheap, spiral-bound notebook where I meticulously tracked every cent. The systemization of scrap. 1. The clean funnel. The biggest time sink, even after outsourcing the finishing, was the initial cleaning and preparation. My basement cage was a disaster of buckets and drying racks. I needed an industrial solution. I went to a local laundromat, the one that ran 24 hours, and spoke to the night shift manager. I offered him a flat $50 a week to let me use one of their massive industrial-strength washers, the ones used for restaurant linens, for 1 hour between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. to clean my raw materials. PVC, aluminum tabs, even the acrylic scraps needed a heavy degreasing. He laughed at first, but when I showed him the bags of clean, sanitized material, he realized it wasn't going to ruin his machines. It was just a weird kid doing a weird thing. The $50 fee was pure profit for him. It was a deal. This was my third pivot, outsourcing logistics. It freed up 4 hours of my week that used to be spent scrubbing plastic in our bathtub. 4 hours I could now dedicate to design and strategy. 2. Product line expansion. Diversification is safety. I couldn't rely solely on jewelry. Jewelry was fickle, driven by fashion trends. I needed stability. I started looking for materials that could be turned into repeatable, less fussy products. That's when I found the old, discarded vinyl records from a defunct radio station. They were scratched, unplayable, but they had that beautiful, black, glossy finish. The idea: melt and shape them into bowls and dishes. The problem: I needed a kiln or a proper oven, which I definitely didn't have. The solution: I leveraged my school's pottery teacher, a kind, eccentric woman named Miss Chen. I offered to volunteer in her studio, cleaning and organizing, in exchange for 10 minutes of access to her low-heat ceramics oven after school, twice a week, to gently melt and form my vinyl pieces over molds I made from old salad bowls. I called the new line Echo Vessels. The market loved them. They were functional, unique, and had a great story. Music given a second life, a second sound. The Echo Vessels sold for $50 to $70 each. They were high margin and scalable because the process was now repeatable. 3. The content machine. The Instagram story was still strong, but I needed to broaden the reach. I bit the bullet and started a YouTube channel, just a simple smartphone on a stack of books, recording the process. I called the series Waste to Wonder. The videos weren't high production. They were raw. They showed me in the smelly basement cage, hands dusty, then transforming the materials, then delivering the finished pieces to Mrs. Rodriguez, and finally Mom packaging the orders with care. The authenticity resonated. People in the comments weren't just saying, "Cool necklace." They were saying, "This is the future of business, and you are inspiring my kids." A video showing the meticulous cleaning of 3,000 aluminum tabs went viral within my niche. It got 50,000 views. Sales spiked. That month, my revenue hit $2,000. The money was great, but the true victories were small, personal, and profoundly validating. Victory 1, the storage cage upgrade. I finally earned enough to afford to buy and install a proper, industrial-quality steel shelving unit for the basement cage. It cost me $150. When I saw my materials, the gleaming white PVC, the organized acrylic sheets, the tidy bins of circuit boards, all neatly stacked and separated, I actually felt a little tear well up. It was so organized. It was dignity of process. Victory 2, Leo. My friend Leo, who had first called me out on my exhaustion, was still working at the convenience store. His shifts were grueling. I approached him with a new offer. "Leo, I need a logistics and shipping lead. Part-time. 3 days a week, 2 hours a day. Your job is to package all the finished goods, generate the shipping labels, and drop them off at the post office. No more working with trash. Just the pretty, finished stuff." I offered him $15 an hour. It was a massive leap from my piecework rate for Mrs. Rodriguez, but Leo's time was dedicated and his organizational skills were excellent. He took the job. It felt enormous. I was now employing a friend. I was creating a legitimate, positive economic opportunity in our neighborhood. The business was bigger than me. It had an employee, a contractor, Mrs. Rodriguez, a raw materials supplier, Mr. Silva, and a logistics partner, the laundromat manager. I was 17 and I was running a 4-person multi-site operation. Victory 3, the car. Failing the driver's test was the beginning of this whole journey. After 6 months of grinding, I passed. And with the accumulated profits, the money I had fiercely guarded in a separate high-interest savings account, I bought a used 20-year-old Ford Ranger pickup truck. It was battered, its paint faded to a dull gray, but it ran. I paid $3,000 cash for it. No loan. No interest. Driving it home that day, the engine rattling and the seat springs groaning, I didn't feel like a millionaire. I felt like a strategist. This wasn't a luxury. This was a force multiplier. No more squeaky bicycle. I could pick up 10 times the material. I could deliver to Mr. Silva's yard in 30 minutes instead of 2 hours. The truck turned my entire fragile system into a high-efficiency machine. My first drive in that truck, I picked up Mom from her second cleaning job. She got in and the smell of stale cleaning product filled the cab. She looked at the worn dashboard, then at me. "A truck, Matthias," she said softly. "You bought a truck." "It's the future, Mom," I said, putting the gear shift into drive. "It's how we grow." The business was now consistently bringing in $4,000 to $5,000 a month in gross revenue. After all costs, materials, payments to Mrs. Rodriguez and Leo, the laundromat, the shipping, the storage fee, I was netting a solid $2,000 a month. It wasn't billions, but it was enough. Enough to pay our rent in full. Enough to start an emergency fund for Mom. Enough to feel the cold, heavy hand of scarcity finally, blessedly lift from my throat. I had turned my shame, the failure of the driving test, the embarrassment of the trash, into a thriving, ethical, and powerful enterprise. The momentum was building. But the true climax wasn't the money. It was the impact. The business was humming. My little Waste to Wonder channel had passed 10,000 subscribers, and the $5,000 a month revenue stream was solid, stable, and predictable. I was 18 heading into my senior year, and for the first time in my life I felt like I was driving the bus, not just holding on for dear life. The climax wasn't a huge cash out or a sale to a major retailer. It was a moment of recognition and transformation for the community that had, ironically, provided the foundation for my success. It started with a local newspaper article. A journalist, seeing the viral YouTube videos and the growing Etsy sales, tracked me down. She wanted the full story. I told her everything: the alley, the fear, the struggle with Mr. Silva, the partnership with Mrs. Rodriguez, the late nights. The article ran under the headline, "From Dumpster to Dollars, Local Teen Turns Neighborhood Waste into Sustainable Enterprise." The effect was instant and profound. It wasn't just my customers who saw it. My neighbors saw it. The kids I went to school with saw it. The same kids who used to gently mock me for sifting through bins. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. My business wasn't just a quirky project anymore. It was a blueprint. A week after the article, I was in the basement cage sorting a new haul of plexiglass when I heard a soft knock on the door. It was a girl from my high school, Sophia. She was 16, quiet, and incredibly talented at painting and illustration. She fidgeted with her hands. "Matthias, can I talk to you? I saw the article. And your videos." I nodded, gesturing to the cleaner side of the cage. The new shelving unit looked impressive even to me. I make little clay figurines," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "But the materials are expensive. And I can't sell them for much." She paused, then looked me straight in the eye. I saw all the cardboard back at my dad's grocery store. The really thick, corrugated kind. It's beautiful, but it just gets crushed. She wasn't asking for a job. She was asking for knowledge. "Can you show me," she asked, "how to turn that into a profit? How to do the listings? How to tell the story?" That was the moment I realized the true purpose of my success. It wasn't the jewelry, the vessels, or even the truck. It was the system I had built. It was the intellectual property of process. I spent the next 2 hours with Sophia, showing her the spreadsheet. Not the numbers, but the funnel. Sourced, clean, designed, outsourced, finishing, market, ship. I taught her about the importance of cost of material being effectively zero and how that creates an enormous margin. A month later, Sophia launched her own small shop, selling incredible abstract sculptures made from recycled, compressed, and varnished cardboard. She called it Boxed Brilliance. This led to the final, crucial step: formalization and expansion. I needed to create a framework that wasn't just my story, but a story for the whole neighborhood. I used a portion of my savings, about $1,000, to draft a simple, open-source, Youth Reclaim Business Starter Kit. It was a free digital guide based on everything I learned: sourcing proposals, basic pricing models, DIY cleaning and prepping hacks, and most importantly, the template for the ethical maker narrative I used in all my listings. I presented the kit at the community center, sponsored by a small grant I won from a local business association that was impressed by my story. I called the initiative Recraft and Rise. Over the next 6 months, 3 more teens from the neighborhood launched their own micro-businesses. One using scrap fabric from a tailor to make pet toys, and 2 others focusing on transforming old tires into stylish home planters. My business, Broke to Billions, Reclaimed Goods, became the anchor and the template. It was still my main source of income, still growing, but my role had fundamentally changed. I was less the artisan and more the visionary and mentor. Mr. Silva, my aluminum supplier, even put up a small plaque next to his recycling bin that read, "Proud Partner of Recraft and Rise Initiative." That was better than any tax break. It was legitimacy. I often stood in my small, organized storage cage, looking at the gleaming materials, and the feeling was no longer one of relief from crushing poverty, but a profound sense of potential. The potential wasn't just in the copper wire or the plexiglass. It was in the neighborhood itself. I realized that the ultimate victory was not just escaping the struggle, but turning around and leaving a ladder for others. I took the concept of turning waste into wealth and made it literal, turning the neighborhood's biggest blight, its overwhelming industrial waste, into its biggest asset: a sustainable, repeatable source of zero-cost raw material and community entrepreneurship. I was no longer just Matthias, the kid from the 3rd floor. I was a job creator, a systems architect, and an accidental activist. The fear was gone. The path was clear. The climb had only just begun.